running. Running like she thought somebody was going to steal it from her. She was getting it over to Charlie. She knew it'd be safe once it got over there. So, but I love to see the kids help. And it's a good thing to have a church full of kids. Amen. And Candace said the other day, she said, man, we've had a lot of babies born here. I mean, I said, I know. That's good. We just keep on going. And I know, listen, Austin and Liz, I was really hoping they wouldn't be here this evening. Every time, here, now don't take this the wrong way, but every time I come to church and you all walk through, I'm a little disappointed here the last little bit. I just keep on praying. Now, I keep seeing pictures, but it's still on the inside. You know, it's still, they're cute, but I mean, they're cuter when they're out and about. So, yeah, I'm a little disappointed in you kids. I'll be honest. I mean, God, the last service of just those two. That's going to be great, isn't it? And been praying a lot for this baby. And then 4 more to go. I heard 100. That's what I heard. Oh yeah, it's good to have. It's good to have babies and parents coming to church together. But real quick, before we get into the lesson, I did want to make mention of a couple prayer requests, if anyone has any. I did want to remember Brother Larry. Found out he's got tendonitis, so that's good. But let's pray for him, and then Brother's going to be going to the dentist finally. Going to be praying for him, especially in 2 weeks. 2 weeks from tomorrow. 3 weeks. 2 weeks from tomorrow, going to the dentist. And of course, there will be another barber here the next time the family's here to church together. So be praying for Austin and Alyssa as they're going Tuesday. Well, I'm gonna be disappointed if she got to come out fast, Monday, but Tuesday's not too long. So be praying for that for them as they go down to the hospital. And a safe, speedy delivery, pain-free delivery, right, Mom? Absolutely. And all the moms said, "Yeah, all right." Any other prayer requests before we start? Yes, sir. Pray for us as we start to go off our porch tonight. Our stairway completely flat. Oh. Pray for Brother Joe and Kay and. Oh no. I was going to say, pray for getting in and getting out this evening when you go back, too. So pray for that. Anyone else? She's got more tests this week. Okay. Heading up to Columbus later in the month, so pray for her. Anyone else? Pray for Waylon and Natalie. I'm sorry? Pray for Miss Phyllis. She had a fall leaving Friendly 50s. So pray for her. Pray for her shoulder. 4 is where we're going to find our text, and this will be our final lesson in what I've been calling in my own for my own. I don't think I've said this out loud, but the studies in Ruth, that's how I clarify this in my notes, and the studies in Ruth series. And so far, throughout Ruth, we were introduced to three main characters: Naomi, the empty woman; Ruth, the dedicated daughter; and Boaz, the kind kinsman. And then when last we were in Ruth, last Sunday evening, we had our missionary, Brother McClure, with us from England, and what a wonderful job he's doing there. And let me just say, what impressive kids he has. His one child runs their sound booth, and I think 9, 10 years old, and just such a little gentleman. And Libby and I were speaking to him, and then I started talking like I was just talking to a 45-year-old man, because he's so well spoken, and we were very impressed at how articulate he was. But anyways, we stepped aside, and Brother McClure updated us. But the week before that, we looked at a tender moment on the threshing room floor. And what happened in Ruth chapter 3, after we introduced Naomi and Ruth and Boaz, we saw in Ruth chapter 3 something very interesting happen. Ruth had been working in the field of Boaz, and she had been gleaning corn there, and she found out that Boaz was a kinsman to her and Naomi. He was related to Elimelech, probably Elimelech's nephew, or maybe we don't know exactly, but he was related to Elimelech in some way, Naomi's dead husband. So anyways, she'd been working all season and the whole harvest, just toiling away in Boaz's field, and Boaz was showing her a lot of favor. He allowed her to come up amongst the reapers, and he would even send home extra corn with her and extra barley with her. And so they had become friends. They had become accustomed to one another. And then it was the time of the harvest, so they came out to the threshing room floor, and they'd bring all that corn they had brought in, and they basically grind it down to a powder, to a meal that they can use to make it usable. Well, after that, Ruth had gone down under the instruction of her mother-in-law, Naomi. And if you'll remember, just by way of a review, she said, make yourself look nice, make yourself smell nice, and you go down there, but don't let anybody know you're there. And so after the threshing floor festivities were over, Boaz went to lay down, and Ruth comes and she uncovers his feet, and she lays at his feet. And she was basically showing complete humility, just so humble, and just putting herself at the place of a servant. And Boaz wakes up. Of course, he's scared to death, as anyone would if a stranger was laying at your feet and asleep. And he begins to speak with Ruth, and he tells Ruth basically asked him, I need a redeemer. We need a kinsman redeemer. We need someone that will marry me, that will keep the name going, the family name alive, that will redeem the land of the family. We need you. And Boaz was quite flattered at Ruth's proposal, for lack of a better word. He thought that she was a beautiful young woman. And not in so many words, Boaz basically tells us he's much older than Ruth. He never really thought that she would think of him as the one to redeem her. And so anyways, that's kind of where we left them off. Boaz tells Ruth that he will be her kinsman redeemer. However, at the end of Ruth chapter 3, we see that there's some problems. There is someone, a kinsman, that is more closely related to Naomi than he is. So in the line of the kinsman redeemer, you have Elimelech, who has died. So he had some male relatives, and there's somebody who is nameless. We never find out what his name is. And then there is Boaz. And by Jewish law, this kinsman that's above Boaz, that's more closely related to Elimelech, perhaps his brother. That's why I said that Boaz may be a nephew, just thinking things through here. But if Boaz is here and this guy is here, so it is his responsibility, this man that is above Boaz, that's more closely related to Elimelech, he can be the kinsman redeemer, and he can push Boaz to the side. But if he doesn't want to redeem Ruth and Naomi, then Boaz can step in. So let's look real quickly just here at Ruth chapter 3, just by way of review. If you look here at verse 12, he says, "And now it is true that I am thy near kinsman, howbeit there is a kinsman nearer than I. Tarry this night, and it shall be in the morning, that if he will perform unto thee the part of a kinsman, well, let him do the kinsman's part. But if he will not do the part of the kinsman to thee, then will I do the part of the kinsman to thee. As the Lord liveth, lie down until morning." So Boaz, being a man of honor, being a man of tradition, being a man of the law, even though he wants to take Ruth to be his wife, even though he wants to redeem Naomi and Ruth and redeem the land for the family, even though he wants to do that, he says, I'm going to default. And if he says that he's going to do it, I can't do anything. But Ruth is excited, I'm sure, no doubt, but then at the same time probably a little worried as she sleeps that night. What if this other guy says that he wants to be the Redeemer? So before we move into chapter 4, though, I just want to wrap up chapter 3, and I want you to notice a few things about Boaz in Ruth 3, 14 through 18. I want you to notice what a great man Boaz is and how much he thinks of Ruth. First off, in Ruth, Ruth 3 and verse 14, we see this. "And she lay at his feet until the morning, and she rose up before one could know another. And he said, Let it not be known that a woman came into the floor." So first off, I want you to notice that Boaz, not only did he promise her to be her redeemer, but in verse 14, he protected her honor. He knew that Ruth was an honorable woman and that nothing happened that was inappropriate between him and her. But he knows how people talk. Praise the Lord. There's probably a bunch of Baptists there in Bethlehem. And he said, so this is what we're going to do to protect your honor. Don't let anybody know that you were here. So Boaz is a pretty great guy. He promises to redeem her in verse 13. And then in verse 14, he protects her honor. He's very interested in protecting her honor. But then we see in verse 15 that he provides for her and Naomi. Verse 15 also he said, "Bring the veil that thou hast upon thee and hold it." And when she held it, he measured 6 measures of barley and laid it on her, and she went to the city. Now, later on in the chapter here, when she comes in, she tells Naomi everything that happened. And in verse 17, she says that Boaz said, "Go not empty unto thy mother-in-law." So he promises to be her redeemer. He protects her virtue. He protects her honor. And then he also provides for her. So when you look at the relationship between Boaz and Ruth, he's already doing all the right things. And let me just say, men, real quick before we look in Ruth chapter 4 and conclude this study. We should be like Boaz. We should be the redeemers of our families. We should protect the honor of our family. And we should provide for our families. And now, I don't think, if there's any single ladies watching or anybody, and you're looking for a man, and you're looking and praying that God will provide you a husband, you better find a man that's going to do what Boaz did. Boaz was a great individual and the kind of man that any father would be glad to call son-in-law. So I just wanted to throw that in there real quick because there's so many things in Ruth that'll preach. But let's move on to Ruth chapter 4. What we're going to talk about tonight, that was all just review to catch us up, to remind us where we've been, to see where we're going. Because in Ruth chapter 4, we're going to look at the ready Redeemer. In Ruth chapter 4. Look with me in Ruth 4 and verse 1. "Then went Boaz up to the gate and set him down there. And behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, and to whom he said, Ho, such a one! Arise, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, Set ye down here. And they sat down. And he said unto the kinsman, Naomi, that is come again out of the country of Moab, selleth a parcel of land which was our brother Elimelech's. And I thought to advise thee, saying, buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. But if thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me that I may know, for there is none to redeem it besides thee, and I am after thee. And he said, I will redeem it. So first off here in these first 4 verses, we see Boaz is true to his word. And then we see in verse 4, he says, hey, there's some land. If you want to redeem it, redeem it. And of course, the guy says, I'll redeem it. It's cheap land. But now let's look on in verse 5. And then said Boaz, what day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. And the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar mine own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. Now this was the manner in former time of Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing. For to confirm all things, a man plucked off his shoe and gave it to his neighbor. And this was the testimony of Israel. Therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. So there's a lot going on here in these first 8 verses. And we're going to break it down and we're going to look at each section of what's happening in Ruth chapter 4 because it's all very important. But in Ruth chapter 4, verses 1 through 2, I see that the stage is set for what's getting ready to happen. First, it says that they went to the gate. In verse 1, the first part of that. Then went Boaz up to the gate and set him down there. So the gate, when it talks about the gate in the city, this isn't just a way to get in and out of Bethlehem. This is a place where business is conducted. If you remember in Proverbs when it talks about a woman that is a favored woman and it says that her husband is known in the gates, that means that this is a place of commerce. It would be similar to business being conducted on the courthouse steps. You know, when we first moved here, there was a parcel of land that went up for auction, and it said in the paper that it was going to be auctioned off, quote, on the courthouse steps. So I went to the courthouse steps, and sure enough, they auctioned it off for a lot more money than I had, so I just turned around and walked away. But this is a place where men would come and conduct business in the gate. So Boaz goes to the place where he knows that he can do what he needs to do to be the Redeemer. The stage is being set. He goes to the gate and he sits there and he waits. He waits because he knows that who he wants to see will end up being there eventually that day. It does not say how long Boaz was there, but I imagine he would have sat all day if he needed to, because he had promised Ruth that he would, because he was a man of honor. So I see the stage is set. He goes to the gate. But then I see that he waved down the other kinsman. It says, and Boaz went up to the gate and set him down there. And behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, unto whom he said, Ho, such a one, turn aside and sit down here. And he turned aside and he sat down. So he went to the gate and then he waved down the other kinsman. He got his attention and then he had him sat down beside of him. It would be like if we were at an auction, and I wanted to, and Brett bought something, and I really wanted it, and he outbid me, and I'd say, "Hey, Brett, come over here, sit down, let's talk for a minute." Well, he knows I'm going to want to talk business because he bought what I wanted. So if you're at the gate, you're getting someone's attention. They know that you have business with them, that there's something that you want to talk about. And so this is what Boaz does in setting the scene. He goes to the gate, then he waves down the kinsman. He gets his attention. He has him come over and he has him sat down. Now notice, God did not have the name of the other kinsman written in the text. Had he done that, we probably could have figured out if Boaz was Elimelech's brother or half-brother or nephew or what is, but that man's not important. You know why? Because he doesn't redeem anything. So God didn't put his name in the text. It even says, Ho, such a one. That's the same as saying such and such. And Boaz waved down such and such. That's basically what God's word says. So anyways, he waves down the other kinsman. And then I see witnesses are gathered in verse 2. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Set ye down," and they sat down. So he goes to the gate, he waves down the other kinsmen, and then he gathers witnesses. Now this is very important because in order for a business transaction of any type to take place, you had to have witnesses under Jewish law. In order to have anything that was going to be legal and standing, you had to have witnesses. And according to Deuteronomy 19 and verse 15, we find the rule of the two witnesses, in which God tells the children of Israel that if you are going to accuse anyone of anything, you must bring two witnesses. That's a rule that holds fast for all business transactions. But Boaz was so intent and he was so serious about what he was about to do, he brought 10. Now I want you to think about the overkill. He only required 2 by Jewish law. He got 8 on top of that because he didn't want there to be any question about what was getting ready to happen. He was that serious about his commitment to Ruth. He was that serious about his commitment to be her redeemer that he went above and beyond and gathered 10 witnesses when he only actually needed 2. So everything we see about Boaz in these first chapter 4 tells us about the kind of man he was. He promised Ruth something the night before. The next day, he immediately went to fulfill that promise. He knew who he was looking for, and as soon as he saw him, he grabbed him and pulled him in and got his attention any way he could. And instead of just getting the minimum amount of men to witness what was going to happen, he wanted there to be no question. He wanted there to be no question down the road. So he got 10. He went above and beyond. That tells you that Boaz was a great man. He was a ready redeemer. He was ready to redeem Ruth and Naomi. So then let's look on. The stage is set. Now let's push on into chapter 4, and I see the situation is presented by Boaz in verses 3 through 5. First off, in verse 3, he explains that there is an inheritance for sale. In verse 3, and he said unto the kinsman, Naomi, that is come again out of the country of Moab, selling a parcel of land, which was our brother Elimelech's. And I thought to advise thee, saying, buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. But if thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know, for there is none besides thee, and I am after thee. And he said, I will redeem it. So what's happening here? Now, according to Jewish law, back in Leviticus, all know we love Leviticus, that page turner of Levitical law. But if you read back in Leviticus, you find the promised land was divided up to the different clans and different tribes of the 12 tribes of Israel. And it actually wasn't owned by anyone. So when he says there's a parcel of land for sale, basically, it would be impossible, and God understood that. So he provided in the law that if I had a family and I died, and my portion of land that was supposed to be for the Grigsby clan of the tribe of, the tribe of Benjamin or whatever tribe I was, if I died without an heir, and Candace was widowed, that the Redeemer, kinsman Redeemer, could come in and get that land and keep it in the Grigsby name. But there wasn't always a redeemer. So if there was no redeemer, my property could be sold at large to whoever wanted it. So that's what the Levitical law says. So basically, Boaz says, hey, there's an inheritance up for sale. And Boaz is a pretty shrewd businessman. Remember, we've already established he's wealthy. He knows what he's doing. So he says, there's an inheritance up for grabs. And it's our kinsman, and you're the nearest kinsman. And it's a parcel of land that belonged to Elimelech. And that's what he leads in with. He says, there's an inheritance for sale, and there's an opportunity to redeem it. In verse 4, he says, if that will redeem it, you should redeem it. So Boaz leads with the land, and this guy's no fool. If there's land up for grabs and I have first dibs on it, well, I'm going to buy it. No doubt, as Ruth and Naomi may have been listening from afar off, maybe they had snuck up to the gate to listen, Boaz tells him, there's some land up for sale, and you can redeem it. You're the kinsman redeemer. You're a closer kinsman than I. And if you want it, take it. And what does he say at the end of verse 1? And he said, the other kinsman, I will redeem it. Could you imagine Ruth? I got all dolled up, got my hair all pretty, got smelling good, went and laid at this guy's nasty feet all night. And this other guy is going to be my kinsman redeemer. But Boaz was no fool. He led with the good. Well, actually, he kind of buried the lead. He said, listen, you can get this land. You can redeem it. Well, this guy's no idiot. I'm a farmer. I want more land. That's the only way I can make more money is to have more crops. Yeah, he said, I'll redeem it. So I see what happens as the situation's presented. There's an inheritance for sale. There's an opportunity to redeem it. But then, in verse 5, is the kicker. Then said Boaz, what day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead and upon his inheritance. So then here's the kicker. Not only is there an inheritance for sale and an opportunity to redeem it, there's a Gentile bride that goes to the buyer. Now, he was all about it when he found out he could get some land. But when he found out that in order to redeem the land, he must also take on a wife. And not only a wife, a Moabitess, Gentile, heathen, unworthy wife. You see, Boaz was pretty smart, wasn't he? He was trying a sales pitch in reverse. This is all the good stuff. But in this other kinsman's mind, he wanted nothing to do with Ruth. He wanted nothing to do with the Moabitess widow of Elimelech's son. He didn't want her. All he wanted was the land. Had the land not been redeemed by the kinsman, it would have been lost to the family. And so this guy says, oh, sure, I'll do that. I'll save it for the sake of Elimelech, thinking that Naomi is an old woman. I don't have to marry her. She's going to die soon. But then he found out, oh no, I get the Moabitess with her. He don't want none of that. Let's look on. He becomes a whole lot less noble after that. See, we've set the stage. We've seen sealing the deal. Verses 6. I see the unwilling kinsman. All about getting the land, but then in verse 6, see what he says. After Boaz says, you get the land, but you also get the woman. And the kinsman said, quote, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar mine own inheritance. That's what he thought of Ruth. Now, lest I mar my own inheritance, then he says, redeem it that thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. So there's a few different things he probably meant that made him reluctant. Now, no doubt this kinsman was older than Boaz, because we've established that Boaz is behind him in line. So this is an old. So no doubt he already has sons and of his own to inherit his property. Well, if he brings in other property and other heirs that he will have to have with Ruth, then it really muddies the water when he dies. So that's one way he can mar my own inheritance. And then no doubt the fact that he probably is an older man with heirs of his own means he has a wife, and he sure don't want to bring a pretty Moabitess home and say, by the way, this is wife number 2. But what I think he means, and what I know in my heart that he means, is that I could have another heir. I could take the land. I could even talk my old wife into accepting Ruth, but there's no way that Gentile is coming to my house. That's what I think he meant. And I'll show you the reason I think he meant that here in just a minute. I'll show you the reason I believe that's what he meant when he said, I will mar my own inheritance. I won't do that to myself. But you see the unwilling kinsman, and then we see after that an unusual contract. So in verse 6, he says, lest I mar my own inheritance, redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. So he tells Boaz, I don't want it. If I got to take the wife, I don't want it. You can have it. You redeem it. And then I see a very unusual contract takes place in verse 7 and 8. Verse 7 says this, Now this was the manner in former time in Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing, for to confirm all things, a man pluck off his shoe and gave it to his neighbor, that this was the testimony in Israel. So basically, what this Bible says is that in order to seal a contract, you had to take off your shoe and give it over. So if you look in, and this might seem a little odd to us, but if you look in the Bible back in Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10, it describes the ceremonial removing of the sandal and giving it. So basically what would happen is, sandals are a lot easier to put on than shoes. So basically what would happen is, the kinsman that was reluctant, and he has the right, he doesn't want to do it, and he's going to let Boaz do it. He takes his shoe off and hands it to Boaz in front of the witnesses, signifying and sealing the deal that I am handing over my right to be the kinsman and redeemer to the next in line. So that's why you see the shoe come off and Boaz get it. It's a not Levitical thing, but it's from Deuteronomy, which is Levitical law as well. So you see this unusual contract take place. This unusual thing that's so odd to us. But for the people in Israel, it was just as normal as anything. This happened in the gate of the city all the time, every day, no doubt. When people would buy and sell land, when people would do anything, the right shoe would come off and it would be handed to show that the contract was sealed. So you see the unusual contract. The kinsman passing on to Boaz the right that he had and he gave to him. And verse 8 says this, Therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, Buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. So before we get on down the road just a little bit, I want you to think about everything that's just happened. You have Ruth and Naomi that have traveled from Moab. Naomi lost her husband. 10 years later, she lost both her sons. One of her daughter-in-laws went back to Moab. Ruth came with her. They went from having food and being provided for to being widows with nothing. And then they came back to Bethlehem, where we talked about Ruth already. She was a Gentile. She was a Moabitess, descendant of Lot, natural enemies of the people that she was now living with. But she never gave up who she was. She never went back on the vow she made to her mother-in-law to stay with her and make her God, my God, your God, your God, my God. Remember, where you liveth, I will live, and where you die, I will die. She never went back on that, even though no doubt she wasn't the most welcome individual in Bethlehem. And then she lowered herself down and she went out into the field to be a beggar. And not only that, she asked her mother-in-law permission to be a beggar. And then she went and she worked all day, sun up to sundown, that even the men in the field noticed how hard she was working. And then Boaz took note of her, and she finds out that through all of her hardship, through all of these hard times, through the death of a husband, through the hard journey to Bethlehem, through the lowering herself down and being so humble to basically beg to eat, finally, when she just thought it couldn't get any worse, Boaz rode up on his white steed. Someone that could redeem her. Someone that could ensure that the hard times would stop. So what did she do? Well, she went to him. And she humbled herself at his feet. And she said, Redeem me, please. Well, that sounds a lot like salvation to me. We are strangers in a strange land. We're just bouncing around. Times are hard. We're starving to death spiritually. We have nothing. And then Jesus Christ, we see Him and we go to Him and humble ourselves and say, redeem me, please. And He does. And just as Boaz did, there's something else you can see in the relationship between Boaz and salvation and you and me and all of us. Not only did Boaz redeem her, Boaz fought to get her. Well, Jesus Christ fought to get you. He came and He died on a tree for you. Lived on this hell-sinish earth for you. I just wanted to point that out before we moved on. Because when you look at the story of Ruth, it's a beautiful thing indeed. So in the sealing of the deal, we see the unwilling kinsman, then we see an unusual contract, but then we see unanimous approval of the people in verses 9 through 12. And Boaz said unto the elders, remember, he gathered 10, and unto all the people, ye are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Shilon's and Milon's of the hands of Naomi. So he said, I'm buying everything. I'm taking everything. I'm redeeming it all. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Milon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon the inheritance, that the same of the dead be not cut off from among the brethren and from the gate of this place. And ye are witnesses this day. And then if you look on in verse 11, and all the people that were in the gate and the elder said, we are witnesses. The Lord make the woman that is come into thine house like Rachel and like Leah, which two did build the house of Israel, and thou art worthily in the Ephrath of the famous of the Bethlehem, and let the house be like that of Pharez, whom Tamar bare unto Judah, of the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. So not only do they witness it, there's unanimous approval, and everybody's thrilled that he did it. I bet that old kinsman that said, I won't mar my inheritance with this Moabitess, felt pretty stupid at this point. When everybody was so excited, there's unanimous approval throughout all of Bethlehem, throughout all the city, all those that are there witnessing the gate. So not only are we glad that you did it, we pray a blessing on the house, that you have a fruitful marriage, and that you do have an heir, and that God will bless you as He has blessed women of this lineage in the past. I bet Boaz felt pretty good too after redeeming this woman that the one kinsman did not want. After all, his mother was Rahab, the one they used to call harlot. You see, just like Ruth, we were too redeemed. We too were redeemed. And not only were we redeemed, there was unanimous approval in heaven when we were. No matter how unworthy we were. But let's close. Before we finish up Ruth, we have to look really quickly. We have to look at the birth of a son. You see, Ruth ends with something pretty amazing. So Boaz, this is verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife. And when he went into her, the Lord gave her the conception, and she bare a son. And the women said unto Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that this name may be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto the restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thine old age, for thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. And Naomi took the child, and laid it in her bosom, and began to nurse upon it. And the women, her neighbors, gave it a name, saying, There is a son born to Naomi, and they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. A son is born. Verse 18 says this, and now these are the generations of Pharez, and Pharez begat Hezron, and Hezron begat Ram, and Ram begat Abinadab, and Abinadab begat Nahshon, and Nahshon begat Solomon, and Solomon begat Boaz, and Boaz begat Obed, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David. And David was king of Israel, and of the house and lineage of David was Jesus Christ born. You see, Ruth not only shows us our salvation experience, it not only reminds us of how we were redeemed, but Ruth also so beautifully shows how we as Gentiles, I don't think there's any Jews in here. Are there any Jews in here? Raise your hand if you were born a Jew. Okay, I don't think so. You know what? We're not God's chosen people. But God said that's okay, because when Jesus comes, He's coming to die for everybody, Jews and Gentiles alike. And He said, I'll even show people, because all throughout the lineage of Christ, I'm going to put people like Rahab, that they used to call harlot, who was a Gentile. And I'm going to put Ruth, who was a Gentile, and a Moabitess, and a descendant of Lot. And I'm going to graft them into the lineage of Jesus Christ, just to prove that anybody can come to a saving knowledge of this man. And Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David. Ruth, her son's name was Obed, her grandson's name was Jesse, her great-grandson was David. And no one wanted to redeem her. No one but Boaz, the ready Redeemer. You just remember this when you lay your head down in bed at night. No one wanted to redeem you save Jesus Christ, the ready Redeemer. No one had any interest in some Gentile, hell-bound sinner except the Son of God, who came down and lowered Himself lower than the angels for you. Nobody would do that for Ruth but Boaz, and no one will do that for you but Christ. The fact that the lineage of Christ is not riddled with royalty, but with Gentiles and descendants of Lot and nobodies from nowhere. That's to show that He came for all men. You see, if the lineage of Christ read like a who's who of the elite in Jerusalem, well, we wouldn't feel like He would want anything to do with us. But because the ancestors of Joseph, because the ancestors of the lineage from which he came were a bunch of ragtag nobodies, makes us feel like we can be accepted too. There are no accidents with God. There were no accidents that Ruth was in a field and was seen by Boaz, and there was no accident that he redeemed her and that they gave birth to a child that would give birth to a child that would give birth to the King of Israel, the greatest king that Israel has ever known. It's no mistake that when Christ comes back, it tells us that He will sit on the throne of David, the great-grandson of a Moabitess nobody that only one man found worth in. Every head bowed and every eye closed.